I guess what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit what we just did there, which is this thing called communication. You've all kind of heard that. You've heard that term, communication. They asked me to talk about, well, what can we do, I guess, as service providers, you know, including police, because police have to communicate with people often not always in bad situations, but de-escalating situations sometimes and so forth. Going to family situations, domestics. And so the presentation I have today for you guys is probably as relevant for what you can do at home. You're probably taking it away for what you can do at home with your own kids, right? Whose parents here, by the way? Anybody parents? Okay. Who wants to be a parent?
Stay.
There you go. Some of you want to, some of you are what you want to do. So you might get some strategies, again, and the strategies we'll talk about is definitely about what adults can do to work better with other adults, but especially what can adults do to work better with youth and children and youth. And but especially what can some of you who are, you know, foster parents or service providers, what kind of practical skills can you do, you know, working in the schools, working with your client populations, right? And we'll explore what the benchmarks or the foundations of communication are. Some of it you might already know, and some might be new, or some might just be putting the language, you know, like I already knew that, but it kind of helps concretize what we already knew, if that makes sense, right? We can always learn to communicate a little bit more effectively. So I kind of called my presentation speaking, listening, hearing, understanding. And I think it's really when we get to this other part where, has anybody ever heard this expression, you know, you're listening to me but you're not hearing, or you're hearing but you're not listening, or you're listening but you're not understanding, you know, these kind of things. And so hopefully we'll get to the bottom of that. I think one thing I might have missed in my presentation is this art of active listening versus passive listening. I don't mean to bad talk the three males, including myself in this, but you've some heard that males are really good passive listeners, right? Versus active listening, you know, but just remember that as we go forward. So again, how can you facilitate and support people? And it's not just going to be about effective communication. Okay, I'll get into communication, we'll talk about effective communication, but what do we mean by healthy communication? And I think that's probably what will make this presentation a little bit more different than some of the other presentations you've heard before. Okay, because we're going to be working toward what do we actually mean by healthy communication, not just simply, most presentations stop at effective communication, and we'll see why that's not enough, okay? So maybe let's go to the next slide. There we go. So we're going to basically look at what is communication, what's effective communication, what do we mean by healthy communication, and then we'll look at what are some of the key threats to communication. And I try to simplify it to the stress challenge, because this is what is often overlooked. Everything comes from stress. Okay, I don't care if it becomes depression, anxiety, you know, barriers that occur between people. Everything ultimately becomes stress. We'll just look at how that plays out. That's the hidden enemy. And then what are some practical strategies that some of you as practitioners can possibly use to help guide your client population, whether they be children, youth, or adults. And you can probably use some of this within your own families and your lives and so forth. Okay? Sorry. So what is communication? So you've heard this expression, 70% of communication is nonverbal. Everybody heard that one? And yet you wonder, well, what do we mean by that? Right? Do you guys know what we mean by that? Well, you can see here. Now this goes back to around the 1960s, some research that was done there. But about 50% is body language, right? So if you guys are looking at my body language, right, what would you say? Do I seem pretty chill? My feet are flat on the floor. I'm wearing cool running shoes. My hands are kind of open like this, right? If I was communicating like this,
Behind the lectern or something.
yeah, if I'm behind the lectern. If you notice I'm not behind the lectern. Who noticed I was not behind the lectern other than the trained observer?
I'd be behind that lectern.
Right? Why am I not behind the lectern? What is that saying to anyone?
True.
Right. Who's right? What's it saying? Open. That's what they said. Right. You know, I'm trying to not create a barrier. I'm trying to. Yeah, I'm standing. I mean, I would prefer to sit. Right? But the reality is, because you know, you're here, you're there, and you're there, right? I'm trying to minimize distance. See? So I'm saying something by not saying something, except I just said it. 38% is tone of voice. It's not what I'm actually saying, it's just how I'm talking, right? Now, if you notice, how am I talking? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Right? Am I projecting okay? Right? But again, and I'm hoping that, my voice is not putting you all to sleep, but I'm hoping that it's not overpowering. But, it's just kind of trying to draw you in a little, right? So it's just the tone of voice, right, in terms of communication. And then 7% is what we might actually say, okay? Now, when we look at communication, it's always important to understand what are you actually doing. Has anybody ever heard of mindfulness? I don't know if I'm a trained clinician, right? I'm a clinician, I'm a forensic social worker. Anybody know what a forensic social worker is? Does anybody watch Criminal Minds?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you know Spencer? Who knows Spencer? I'm Spencer. In real life. I'm a real life Spencer. Okay? And just like Spencer, I don't like guns. Okay? Now he likes guns, he's American. Okay? But I don't like guns. And Jared's from Kansas. But the reality is, Kansas City. But the reality is, it's on real life Spencer. And I do criminal profiles and that kind of stuff. But I also do, work for, I was a former clinical director for Peel Children's Aid, consulting clinical director for Peel Children's Aid. And I'm also a university professor. But I mean, in terms of doing that, you have to kind of know who your audience is, like who you're talking to, that kind of thing, right? So when we're talking about communication, right, you have to know, well, what do we mean by who's talking? Who's the person talking and who's he talking to or she talking to, right? So it's called the sender or the transmitter, right? And we'll get into why we use that language in a second, right? So it could be a person, it could be the media, like it could be radio, television, right? Think about that, right? Something transmitting, right? That's going out. Could be animals. Do any of you have pets? Okay. Who knows when what do you have, a dog or a cat?
Cat.
Cat. Okay. How do you know when your cat wants to go out?
That's weird.
There you go. Is the cat communicating?
Yes.
Transmitting? There, data received? Roger that. Right? Does nature communicate with us? Right? Like, has any of you gone down and put your hand in Lake Ontario? Sometimes? There's two signals that come back. One, if it's really cold, it says don't go in the water, right? And the other one is if you pull your hand out and it's turned green, what does that say? It's polluted. Right? It's communicating. So nature can communicate. And again, some people believe in spiritual communication. Spiritual communication. So forth. So that being said, we know that there's different ways that communication can happen in there's different aspects of transmission or sending out. But on the flip side, there has to be a receiver for communication to occur. Because otherwise, the message going out, you're just talking to yourself. I mean, theoretically, you're the sender or receiver. But for communication to occur and be meaningful in some way, or hopefully meaningful, there's usually a receiver. And sometimes or receivers, like you are together, you are an audience. If I was just talking to one of you, you'd be a receiver. But I'm talking to all of you, receivers, also called what? An audience. Make sense? See how it works? Okay. So you need both of those elements as primary components of communication. And it's interesting, the whole word, communication, right, is broken down, from the Latin, if you will. Com is with interest. The word com, you've heard of com. Have you heard of com? Who's heard of com? You've heard of com, right?
Comms.
Yeah, the comms, right?
Yeah.
Right, the radios, right? That's a com. Is that a com right there? You got a com right here. That's a com,
Yeah.
right? So that's com, right? Like a walkie-talkie kind of thing. The word uni means one. If you think about it, and the end of the word patient is a process that talks that anytime you see that word shun at the end of a word, it means a process. So we're talking about a process of oneness. If you think about that. And how many of us has ever thought about this? And that's what I meant to say this earlier. As a clinician, as a whole point of saying I was a clinician earlier, is this whole process of mindfulness. Who's heard of mindfulness? Oh, so some of you practice that. I would practice. You practice. You need it.
Do it every time.
Yeah, exactly. But when do we actually get a chance to do this, right? Can somebody tell me what mindfulness is? Those of you who practice, how would you summarize it? We want to take a stab.
Just paying attention, basically, whether it be chewing a toffee and realizing, sort of paying just attention only to that. And being more mindful might be that you slow down enough to recognize the smell of flowers or that little bunny that hopped along there sometimes. Because our lives get so demanding, we can lose touch with that, and that tends to result in mental health issues.
Yeah. How many of us are mindful of the word communication when we say it? Like, how many of us are mindful of that? Like, what we're actually saying? That we're actually saying, can you be one with me? So when you say to your child, or you say to your partner, or you say to your colleague, hey, I need you to communicate with me, what you're actually saying is, I need you to be one with me in understanding. Did you all get that? Okay. And so just to be mindful of that word communication in and of itself, we can introduce this clinical aspect of using mindfulness so you can go, hey, and then this begins to carry us forward to how I'm going to be talking about communication with you today. Because I want you guys to become one with me in this exercise so that then you can become one with your clients or facilitate a way that your clients can become one with their loved ones. And then we'll get towards healthy communication, okay? So what are some types of communication? There's this verbal or nonverbal, which I've spoken about. Facial, you can look at the face, or vocal. What, if a person's going like this, like it's kind of like I like to trick. I have a little dog, right? And sometimes my dog is like really upsetting and distressing to me. Who has a dog here? One dog, okay. You get frustrated by your dog? I get frustrated by my dog. My dog's so cute. My dog gets away with so much. And sometimes she's doing something rad, and I'm like, come here, Lily. You're in trouble. So what's my face saying? I'm really happy. The officer knows I'm being serious. Right. But I'm really psychopath. But I'm being happy. But I'm giving what I'm saying is not probably so nice. You see what I'm saying? And so sometimes we can. The master of that would probably be a guy like Jim Carrey. And if he ever does, where he has these crazy faces, but his voice is saying something else, right? We can speak, or we can write. Again, it can take place in a different kind of way, right? Direct, you can give a direct message, or we can give an indirect message, right? Sometimes a big challenge with kids is that we're not being direct with them, right? They don't understand because sometimes with kids we have to break it down and make it comprehensible to use words that we forgot that we were children a long time ago. and so the words we're using as adults might not be as comprehensible, for some given kids, right? Or we can say, sometimes there's what's called intended versus unintended. I didn't mean to say that. Has anyone ever said something you didn't mean to say?
Well, not the way it's taken.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's about perception, right? Sometimes we perceive, communication is perceived in a different way by who? The receiver, the audience, right? Oftentimes, I know with for example, with my significant others in many of my lifetimes that I've had, I've often said things, and they were never received the way they were meant. And it's kind of like dinner is made, and you sit there and go, wow, it's kind of tough meat or something, right? I mean, it's tough. I don't think that's is that happening? Could be.
It's not what you want to hear when you say
It should be. It's just delicious, right? And or how do I look? You look fabulous. You didn't even look. Right? Just change it, right? That. It could be personal or impersonal, right? It could be personal or impersonal, right? Depending on how we engage, right? We could be serious or non-serious. And we could, of course, be offensive or non-offensive, right? And again, that can play out in different ways, right? If any of you have ever gone to charity fundraisers, some of the charities here, I remember I was at a charity fundraiser, and the master of ceremonies was a guy named Mike Bullard. Have you heard of this Mike Bullard guy? TV, a comedian from CTV. And anyway, it was for Easter seals, and he was talking, and I guess some of his jokes were not going over very well. with the audience, right? And he unintentionally offended. See what I mean? But he thought it was just being funny. So it's often not what is said, okay, is what we say here, but oftentimes it's how it's received or how it's interpreted, which essentially is a variation on the same thing. You all understand? You all get that, right? Let's go to the next one. So that being said, we talked about maybe how do we work towards effective communication. So what's this? You know what that is?
Broken eye.
It's a broken eye pattern. What am I trying to infer there? This is, you have to understand, when I asked my clinical assistant to get this slide for me, you can see he's a young man. He's not like me, and he's not like me. I'm quite old now, but you tell them all. When their texting is called. Does the police know what that's called? I'm an expert.
I'm not working, but
I'm an expert in the court, so I have to testify in this kind. It's called grunting.
Grunting.
Yeah. So you know when they go like, "Yo, what's up?" You ever notice that? The kids, they text and they use a different language. Has anybody seen that? Yeah, it's called grunting. Anyway, broken telephone. And so, who can tell me what broken telephone is? Remember that game? What is it? Who played that one? Yeah. What was it?
We all did.
You all did, right? Like, so do you want me? I mean, I'm not going to do it right now. But the problem is you're so far it won't work. Okay? Because then you have to get out of me. So we don't want you to get uncomfortable. But if you whisper something and then you whisper something and then it comes to here, you each whisper something in each other's ear, and then it comes to Melissa, and then it comes back to the officer. Here's Officer Ward.
Yeah,
Ward. And then one of us will get arrested. You see that's broken telephone. Okay. So there's a miscomprehension. There was a breakdown in the effective communication. What started being said there ends up being something completely misconstrued and misrepresented by the time it gets here. Right? You've all heard that, right? Okay. So effective communication then is to ensure that there's integrity between the sender and the receiver. So what goes in on one end is how it's received and interpreted with the sameness, validity, the oneness we're talking about, and it's the same on either side. Is that good? Is that a good thing? What are some of let's look at the next thing. So what are some of the outcomes of effective communication, right? Okay. So I just kind of, I didn't want to play like mind games with you. So what I did is I have my questions. I just put the answers right out there for you, right? Some people will they'll leave all the they'll let the answers come because they're trying to like a game show. Yes, but I don't want to be Monty Hall up here, so I figured I would just give you all the answers, right? But understand, we know there's understanding. Is understanding a good thing? Yeah, it's a good thing. But it's not about goodness or badness. Think about that, right? Just because you're having effective communication, like, right? When I'm doing a forensic interview with a person who's been charged with something, and they, and they're basically letting me know that yes, I did commit the crime, I committed the murder. That's not a good thing. I'm thankful that they're taking accountability. I'm thankful that they're being truthful. But they're going to jail for a long time, It's probably a good thing for the victim, but it's definitely, it's not a good thing, right? It's not none of that stuff. So, but there's clarity. So it's not about goodness or badness. There's clarity there. You see what I mean? Of course, if we have effective communication, there's ambiguity. Okay, there's certainty, right? There's certainty. But again, just because there's certainty, if a parent gets their child and says, "Did you steal that from the Shoppers Drug Mart?" And the child says, "Yes, I did." That's not a good thing, but at least they're being truthful and they're taking ownership. You see, but again, and again, the truth is not always easy to accept. So just because there's truth, because it's effective, it doesn't mean it's good or bad, right? So the reality is, it's how the communication then gets treated after the fact, right? Because you've heard the expression, the truth is not sometimes easy to take. So just because there's effective communication, it doesn't mean it's either good or bad. That's part of it, that's important, but it's not the end of the story. And a lot of presentations on being communicators is all about being an effective communicator, or communicating efficiently and effectively, right? Being on point and gaining understanding, but that's not enough, right? And what doesn't tend to occur is how do we move towards this health communication. And when we're talking about that, we're really talking about the fact that it's not all about rationality or the mind. Again, I go back to as a clinician. You know, my job as a clinician is to be able to diagnose, assess, evaluate, treat the psychosocial components of who people are. That means not only am I working on treating a person's mind, not only am I trying to facilitate functional behavior, but I'm trying to address their feelings and their emotions. And feelings or emotions are often what gets problematic in a lot of communication scenarios with parents and their children, with each other, and so forth. Because feelings, as you know, are really big things that we often aren't mindful of, going back to the mindfulness analogy, right? And can anybody ever think about how your feelings are very powerful over your rational mind? Has anybody thought about that? Who's conscious of that? Anybody? Who here has laughed when you didn't want to laugh? Or who's laughed inappropriately at times? None of you? Not a Christmas dinner? Okay. Who here has gotten afraid when you don't want to be afraid? Or who here has gotten angry when you don't want to be angry? Does that ever happen? Right? And so you can see that just by sitting there going, wait a minute, I'm going to be thoughtful and I'm going to be reasonable, but yet our emotions can take over, right? Oftentimes, you know, when I get to work with police, that one of the biggest challenges working with first responders, especially police officers or army people, is sometimes they're in situations where emotions get really heated. And so when you're dealing with an emotionally charged client, especially, what do officers try to do? Get the person to de-escalate is the word I think they use, right? Calm down, bring them down. And oftentimes they have to try to be forceful because to try to bring people down naturally is a very, very difficult thing. Has anybody ever had none of you here have part of what I'm saying. Does any of you know, I sort of said in my class, does anybody know of somebody else, not you, right, who's dealt with somebody who's been high emotion, you couldn't get them to calm down? Has that ever happened? Right? Has that ever happened? Does anybody know if that ever happened with children? Right? Those kids, you see them in the shopping mall all the time. Has anybody seen the kid in the shopping mall? I want that now! I had 3 of those. And now I have a new one. I just have a brand new grandfather. Right? It's a blessing to be a grandfather. Now I can legitimately say I'm old. I figured that, you know, I didn't put this in my presentation tonight because I thought there were children and youth there, and they might, you know, they know Lady Gaga and stuff. But I figured for us, some of you might know these guys. Any of you know these guys? Who does not know these guys? Who's too young to know these guys? Come on, one of you should put up your hand. Jared's too young. So, but again, you know, I figured, you know, the thing I like about, you know, and this is missing from, I think, the current musicians of our day and age, you know, but we had it back then. You see, look at there. You have our presentation from Led Zeppelin from 1967. Look at that, right? Good times, bad times, when communication breakdown occurs. See that? Communication breakdown. Right? And then we're going to talk a little bit about that. So what are some aspects of ineffective communication, right? Ineffective communication. Misinterpretation. That's not a good thing. Again, think about it. It's never a good thing. Misinterpretation, unless you're believing it to be good when it's not, that could be ignorance is bliss, something like that. We've heard that, ignorance is bliss. But then you're not knowing what the truth is, right? But misinterpretation, misunderstanding, right? Miscomprehension, or missing the point, right? Barriers to receiving, right? So these are some, you know, we know that whereas effective communication is neither good or bad, or it could be good or bad, right? Depending on what the actual message is. This is when the actual message it has a barrier somewhere in it, okay? And then that could be a bit problematic, right? But that being said, when misinterpretations occurring, or misunderstanding, or miscomprehension, missing the point is occurring, right? The question you want to say is, well, how do people think when these things occur? How do people think? So if something's been misunderstood, that's okay. Happens, right? Very rational. sorry I didn't wasn't clear enough, right? Oh, I miscomprehended. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't miss. Okay, I'll try to. Okay, let me try to understand, or can you explain it in a different way, right? Something like that. Right? Very rational. You get me, right? But what happens when it's somebody comes up to you and goes, "What's that smell?" Are you trying to say I have audio? But really, what they're trying to say is, "Wow, that's maybe a really nice perfume." See, they don't because maybe that's what it was. It was just what's that smell? And it was because they're actually like the smell. But if the person maybe has a self-esteem issue, they automatically think that maybe you're saying something bad about it. See how it depends on how the receiver's taking the message, right? So again, how people feel, this could be a big issue. So how we think could be one thing. We can rationally control our rational minds, but feelings can take us in a different direction, and before you know, we can get really upset, distressed, feel hurt, and so forth. Right? Have we got any questions so far? Check my time. Okay. What slide number am I? Doesn't say.
13.
Oh, 13. Okay. So again, so what are some examples of communication breakdown? What does communication breakdown look like? Right? So I kind of have some examples here. Who here knows somebody, because I know none of you have ever done this, but who here knows somebody else who has ever raised their voice? Right? None of you, I know none of us do. I certainly don't ever do it. My children would. She's the officer's a profiler, she doesn't lie to my computer. But you know, she was like CSI. But again, why do people raise their voices? Hint, the answers are on
Frustration.
right? The answers, exactly. But specifically, some people feel they're not being heard, right? If a person, you see, subconsciously, if you feel you're not being heard, have you ever thought about this? Again, practice mindfulness. Have any of you ever thought the reason? Who here repeats yourself over and over to your kids? Or somebody else is repeating themselves over and over to their kids. Why? Why do you
have to kind of acknowledge that they get it?
Right. And 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 10. I'm sorry, after 2 times, it's just disrespectful. If they've actually heard. Do you get me? Like, it's just, I don't care if they're playing, entrenched in a video game. Right? Last time I checked, the parent is more important than the video game. Right? Yeah. They keep going over and over and over and repeating. And so the parent is actually not feeling respected or heard. So they keep raising their voice or repeating themselves. It's the same kind of scenario. See what I mean? And so the reality is when people keep raising their voice, oftentimes, but you're not conscious. The average person is not conscious that they're not being heard. What they're actually feeling at a subconscious level is actually disrespected or ignored. But most of us don't sit there and think like that. We might actually feel it, but our feeling is disconnected from our rational mind. We're just sitting there going, why are they ignoring us? Or, they're not listening. We're not conscious. Some people aren't conscious of the fact I'm being disrespected. I'm not, has any of you ever said that? I feel like I'm not being heard. Has any of you ever said that? Or repeat that message intrinsically to yourself? Most of you don't. Most of us don't. Right? But that's actually what's happening at a psychosocial level. Of course, we feel like we're being ignored, and then sometimes there's no attention being paid to you, and that's again a feeling of weakness, right? Okay. So when communication breaks down, what you can see is now, what do those 4 items have in common? Feel not being heard. They're feeling that they're being disrespected, ignored, feeling that they need attention. What do those 4 communication breakdown pictures have in common? Anybody? What's the commonality between those 4 things? Repeat that? Feelings. Feelings. You see? Feelings. Not thinkings. Right? Not behaviorings. But feelings. These things, feelings, are really powerful. Right? Okay. So we're going to have to look at feelings. So what are some threats and challenges to effective communication? I'm going to go back to effective communication here, right? things that get in the way. What gets in the way? So we know that communication between the sender or the transmitter and the receiver or the audience, when it gets compromised, it's things that get in the way that compromise it in some way to decrease the effectiveness of the communication, right? And what are those things? Number one, just daily life stress. Stuff, who's ever heard the expression, stuff gets in the way? Who's heard the expression, life gets in the way? What did John Lennon say? Life is what happens while you're busy doing other things. Right? When people are stressed, they often experience barriers in focusing, right? When people are stressed, if you're stressed and somebody's trying to tell you or teach you something, isn't that difficult? Have you ever wondered what it's like for a kid at school when they're hungry? Their body is stressed. Their body is sending them messages, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. That creates stress in their body. How are they supposed to learn? Right? It focuses hearing. If somebody's stressed, it's hard for them to hear. Right? Understanding. Right? Again, varies in understanding, varies in comprehension. Right? When I did some, I had to write a training manual for the tactical support unit for Durham tactical support squad to deal with emotionally disturbed people. And I remember I was talking to the officer, and the officer said, you know, when we're in a high stress situation and we have to deal with something, our body stresses up and we're hyper focused and we can't hear stuff that's happening out here. Is that true? Because their attention gets focused in this one direction. But that's a different form of stress. That's a stress that allows us to focus. Sometimes we call that eustress. That's the same kind of stress that allows us to focus. It's the stress that allows us to get up in the morning. It's the stress that allows us to get pumped for an exam, and focus on the exam. We just get totally focused, right? But again, it's still stress. Okay, that's good stress. Of course, when we're stressed in a bad way, you know, we're just like we say, stressed out. Okay, our body's stressed because we're hungry, we're stressed because we're tired. Again, we zone out and we're not able to take in information. So it can happen on good stress or bad stress situations. The bad stress is called distress. We normally say stress, the shortened form of stress as we know it. Bad stress is from distress versus eustress, which is a good stress. We normally don't refer to stress from the good stress scenario. Okay. What else gets in the way of effective communication? Generational gaps. Adults and children. Adults and youth. Sometimes you ever notice that you're trying to say something to your kid and the kid looks at you like you're an alien, you're not understanding. Why don't young people and children understand us sometimes? Anybody know? It's really simple answer. When you're generally older, you have what? Life experience. Right? A lot of times, when we're trying to say to the kid, don't you know how, you're saying to your 10-year-old kid, don't you know how hard I work to make money so you can have a place to live and eat? Kid's looking at you. Why? Well, their work to provide food and shelter? How would they understand? Yet we demand our children to empathize or live in our shoes. And parents do this all the time. Like we expect the kids to understand. And look, I look at my kids. I mean, the officers here were just presenting on the internet and technology, right? A smartphone. When I was growing up, all I had was dumb phones. And if you're right, you remember feeling dumb? We didn't know what a smartphone. We didn't know what a smartphone was back then. So they talk a different language. We didn't have an interweb when I was growing up. Right? When I was in grade 8, like we had one sort of computer thing in grade 8 back in 1980, and we had 30 kids in my class, and we had to share it. We had punch cards for it. And I wasn't even allowed to use it, because I was the bad kid in class. I just get banished from it. They wouldn't let me near that thing. If they would have let me near the computer, I would have stolen it, to be honest. So I was one of those kids. If you read my national story, right? Anybody read my national story? You can read my story of the Vancouver Sun or the Toronto Sun, right? When I became a court-certified gang expert, They said, well, why are you a court certified gang activist? Because you're a professor? Is it because you're a doctor? Is it because you're this really smart guy? And I'm like, no. Well, how'd you become a gang expert, Dr. Hutchinson? I was in a gang. I guess that gives you some expertise, right? When I was a kid, sorry. The water's really good here. I'm used to drinking Toronto water. This is real water. Other threats to effective communication? Unrealistic expectations. You ever think, if the receiver is expecting to hear something else and wants to hear something else, what they hear may be distorted in some way, right? Okay? And again, it could be between the sender and the receiver. It could be on either side. Maybe the communicator is not clear. Maybe the receiver has a... Has anybody ever talked to somebody who had expectations? And then whatever was said didn't live up to their expectations?
They're not hearing what they want to hear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, as a presenter who comes and does, I do conferences a lot of times, and, I speak all across the country and stuff like that. And of course, I lecture on a regular basis to my university classes. I have to make sure that what I'm delivering is what people want to hear. And hopefully, not giving them what they expect. I want to try to deliver something more than what people expect. If that makes sense. Right? It's like, oh wow, I didn't expect that. Wow, we got a lot more out of it. Wow, that was worth it. It's worth the price of admission. Cultural gaps. Cultural gaps, we can normally think, well, we have people from other countries. Canada is a land of immigrants. We have people coming in from all kinds of, everybody's an immigrant except for our First Nations people. They were here first, right? And then everybody else was an immigrant. But again, people bringing in their own cultural nuances, right? Different types of gaps in understanding. Well, I don't understand why they are talking that way, or I don't understand that expression, right? But we can also, cultural gaps occur between age, right? It was a different culture in Canada, like 20 years ago compared to what it is now at a subcultural level. And we even have cultural things within our nation, right? You can look at, people who are into punk rock versus people who are into classical music. There's cultural cleavages there, right? I don't know why you listen to that noise. But what happened to the good music? I miss the good music, like Jan and Dean and Elvis. I say those things to my kids, and they think those were the name of pets. Elvis. Elvis was a dog. And then, of course, feelings and emotions. Perhaps one of the biggest threats to effective communication. Because when feelings can get wrapped up and in the way, all kinds of things can occur. Do you all know that generally most big arguments start from something really small that may have been misconstrued? Do you ever think about that? Go back to mindfulness. Has anybody ever heard the expression, why are we even arguing? What are we arguing about again? Has anybody ever known, not any of you, but somebody else, who has gotten into an argument, and halfway through the argument, they forgot what they were actually arguing about?
Oh, woman.
Right? Right, I think, right, so the reality is, so what that means, what has taken over? Emotions. The rational reason, my significant other has reminded me that feelings are valid and important. Right? And the truth is, they are. They're valid and important. And they are what they are. And people are allowed to have feelings. But it's when they become damaging and hurtful and create really bad things, that's where the problem occurs. So the best thing to do with feelings is definitely to get them out and let them out. It's funny, one of my tactics that I have when I deal with some young people, and they come into my office and I'm as a clinician, and they're being all polite, hello sir, it's really pleasant to meet you. And I know they're just completely BSing me. So I sit them down. So how the F are you? I actually say that. And I use a lot of other swear words. Why do I do that? Because I want to cut through the crowd and let them get it all out.
Give permission to talk, basically.
Yeah, give them, and then when they start, and so now they start swearing, and I stop swearing because I have to be a good role model. And I'm in shock that I've actually made them swear that much. But they're able to get out all their emotion within the first half hour of our session. By session number 2, I've de-escalated them. They've gained trust and rapport with me, and then they stop swearing as well. Because they've gotten out of their system. Because they're so guarded. They get to be who they are. So you have to cut through the feelings. The best way to cut through feelings is to actually let it out. Do you ever know people who, once they've gotten it all out of themselves, they're like, oh, I feel drained. You ever notice that? Why is that? But it's a tactic that we can use, I guess, especially as clinicians. So with communication, if we want to get to the crux and have a decent, sometimes it's just get it out, let it out, and then we can get into the dialogue. Right? People are calm now. They're tired. So how do we deal with this psychosocial health component? Okay. So it's not simply about effective communication. It's not about what is healthy communication. Okay. And I think this is where we're moving towards as practitioners, working with the people, the young people we work with the parents that we work with our colleagues anyway. Okay. You know, it's so funny. You know, I love the Aboriginal wheel. I really do, because again, from a cross-cultural perspective, the scientific Euro-Western model, you know, likes to presuppose things. And I had the blessing of being able to teach in the First Nations Technical Institute. Has anybody heard of First Nations Technical Institute? It basically was funded by the government, and it was designed to facilitate people who came from First Nations communities, if they had a college degree, to partner with a university and actually get a university degree. Again, it's one of these really cool scenarios where you come in as, you know, the hotshot professor, but you actually learn more from your students than you actually give to them, which is, I thought, was really cool. So this is something that they brought to me. You know, I came in, I was teaching research methods, I'm teaching like clinical stuff, and they're like, okay, doctor, professor, can we share with you? Because that's the way it was. It's not just what can I give them, it's what can they give back to me, which I thought was awesome, right? And they showed me this. But again, I looked at it how, you know, and again, I'm not an expert on this, right? But just about the mind, the emotion, the body, and the spirit, and the balancing of those, right? Again, this is kind of, and then just how that breaks down. And I'm not an expert on that. But I'm going to flip to the next slide. Again, this is how, if you know, this is how us clinical people would look at it. Can you go back to the previous slide? I just think that one's such more eloquent. Plus it's more colorful. I think, okay, go. My goodness. But every person is this individual with stuff all around them. Now, I could have done tons of circles around this person as well. Tons of circles all piled up, right? And all the different layers that pile up on people. So if you can imagine, you know, that guy, little person in the middle there, has tons of circles around them, but they have the forces of society around them, right? They have, you know, politics, economics, the history of what got them there, the geography, the place that they live in, the culture, you know, all the things that are around them, right? And they're in the middle of the cycle, what we call the person and their environment. You know, the layers that are all around us, all surrounding us, right? Teaming up. And just being a person, we're not conscious of that, right? It's, if you think about it, like, you know, you're just one person, you start your day every morning, you're all chilled and relaxed. And then you drive through traffic to get to work. And then you get to work. Then you have to deal with your coworkers. Do any of you have difficult coworkers? No, don't answer that. Do any of you know people who have difficult coworkers?
Yes.
And then you have to deal with your client populations. Do any of you have different client populations that you have to deal with? Or know people who have different clients? I know the police don't, right? Because she's OPP, she just never deals with any bad people. Only covert or police do. So, So, so then you got to deal with all that. And then you got to deal with the supervisor. And then you get accused of doing something wrong, even though you know you're doing your job better than everybody else, and it's probably the other person should be getting in trouble, but you're the one that gets in trouble. And then you have to drive back home through traffic. And then you get home and somebody didn't let the dog out. Or somebody didn't prepare dinner effectively, right? Get it? And then your partner comes home, and what happens? Like, what's been adding up on a person all day long? Stress. All day long. The pressures of the world. Right? The pressures of time, the pressures of space, the pressures of community, the pressures of living, the pressures of the culture, the pressures of capitalism, the pressures of the rat race, the pressures of wanting to get a promotion and not getting one, and so forth. So, when it comes to communication, what's often forgotten is that communication is heavily influenced by the psychosocial reality. It's heavily influenced by the psychosocial reality. And I'm a psychosocial health care provider. I'm a psychosocial health care provider. I am committed to helping people manage their psychosocial health. Right? Their emotions, their thinking, the way they behave, their adaptability. And so we talked about the cognitive or the rational. Oftentimes that can be controlled. The behavior, for lack of a better word, is often an outcome. Behavior is an outcome. Behavior is easy to do. I want my kid to behave differently. That's easy for me. You can force that. We know police can force that. Police can force it. We put somebody in jail. They better be behaved. They better be controlled. Otherwise, see. So we know we can control behavior. It's harder for parents sometimes because we don't only run prisons in our homes. Some parents do. We try to control behaviors in schools through what? Rules. Right? Rules. Right? Nothing. But emotions, very difficult to control. Even when you want to control your emotions, it's so difficult. Even for everybody here. You've all laughed when you didn't want to laugh. You've all cried when you didn't want to cry. You've all gotten angry when you don't want to get angry. You've all laughed when you might not want to laugh. Right? Think about it. Controlling our emotions, even for the most seasoned practitioners, is a difficult thing. Think about it. So behavior, it's learning to control emotions. That's the hidden issue. But the thing that challenges emotions more than anything else is what? What's that word? Stress. If you think about it, you get right to the crux of it. I can talk about depression, I can talk about anxiety, I can talk about all the clinical issues and addictions, and I deal with all that stuff, right? I don't believe in the word addiction, right? I don't believe the word addiction is a fallacy. I get that from my best. One of my mentors is Gabor Mate. Anybody heard of Gabor Mate? Anybody heard of Gabor? He's like a god. He's like a mentor. He's like a father to something, right? And bless him to have Mate get on the speaking circuit with him. But there's no such thing as addiction. It's basically dependence. There's a climatization to a foreign substance. It becomes about the withdrawal. Once you take it, your body gets dependent on it, and it's going to be the withdrawal. But people, they turn to drugs and alcohol for what reason? Most of the time. As a form of what? Why do a lot of people turn to drugs and alcohol in this addictive way?
Connection.
So, cope. To cope. So they're trying to cope. They are using medication. They're self-medicating. Why do people drink? To numb their feelings. Why? People, we do it because it's fun. Why do we do it? Because it's fun. It makes us feel good. Think about that. If it makes them feel good, how were they feeling before? Not good or bad. Because they want to feel good. That's why it's fun. It's a why. They're numbing themselves, which is kind of like medication. See how it works? They medicate. And so, but what are they medicating? What are they medicating? Their feelings, right? They want to feel good because they're not feeling good. They're trying to medicate their bad feelings. See how it works? And then they just want it all the time. Has anybody ever dealt with a crack addict? Has anybody ever dealt with a crack addict or somebody who's on crystal meth or something like that? Because when you do, what you realize, or an alcoholic, when you do, you realize that the reason that they need this substance is they can't live without it. Because they don't feel right. Key word, feel right. They know it's bad for them. They know they don't want it anymore. They know it creates other problems. The rational stuff is there, but they can't do what? Stop. Right? The power of feelings. Feelings are not rational, but they are what they are, and they're powerful. And they get in the way of communication. And they can make communication unhealthy. React to what they feel. People often react based on what they feel. And sometimes that's why it can be irrational. And people often react based on what they perceive. And you don't even need to say anything. Sometimes it's just based on a view. Right? You know, when I'm watching football, I will tell you, that is a relationship killer. Honey, can you go walk the dog? Wow, that Tom Brady. I really like those pants. Honey, are you getting up to walk the dog? Oh, there's repeating. He doesn't deflate his balls there. He keeps them pumped up pretty good. You know, it's like a story on Super Bowl, right? Are you gonna walk the dog? Did you say something? Right? It's the nonverbal, just ignoring, not paying attention. I didn't respond. I didn't respond rudely. I just wasn't paying attention. Nonverbal. Being nonverbal. Ignoring. So, some foundations for healthy communication. There's a need to balance. A need to understand. How do we get to the oneness in a good way? There has to be understanding plus a balancing of the emotion. There has to be a balancing of the emotion. Dialogue is about hearing and listening plus understanding. Whether it's right or wrong, at least there'll be respect. At least there'll be respect. Sometimes that's all people want is respect. One of the big things with young people, where they have an issue, a lot of young people will say, my parents or my teachers or even the police want me to respect them, but I want to feel like I'm respected. That's the number one message I get from you. That's the number one message I get from you. I was dealing with a young person in therapy last night. A really nice young kid. He gets singled out at school all the time. He gets singled out. You know, all the other kids are wearing hats in school. For some reason, the teacher and the principal is always taking away his hat. And they expect him to be respectful back to them. And I go, well, why are they just taking away your hat? Because I don't know. And then he gets mad at them, and he's, oh, whatever. You know, I'm supposed to give him anger management. But how can I give him anger management? I'm sitting here thinking, well, do you feel like you're getting respected? He goes, no. He was being completely respectful to me as his clinician. He only met me. He was being respectful. Because I began to give him respect. And he told me at the end of the session, he opened up to me. This is, he doesn't open up to anybody. He opened up to me within 1 hour. And I go, and as he's walking out of my office, I go, hey man, I go, what made you open up to me like this today? And he looks at me and he goes, because you showed me autopsy pictures. Probably not the most appropriate thing to show a 16-year-old, but he wanted to know what I did. And I said, why am I old? He's old enough. No. Here's what a corpse looks like. Kind of funny. But he respected that. I cut down the barrier. Because he respected me. Sending, receiving, hearing. We have to affirm. There's nothing better than acknowledgement, is there? Who likes it when somebody says something, or you say something to somebody, and then they acknowledge what you said? How do you feel when you're acknowledged? Affirmed. Yeah. You feel that. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that a cool feeling? Right? You like to be validated. Like, you actually feel like, who likes to feel like they're like just talking into thin air, bouncing off the walls, right? Okay. It's not always what is said. Has anybody heard this? It's not always what is said, but it's how it's said. Have anybody heard that? You know, you can say the same thing, but it can sound nice, or it can sound annoying. Can you take the garbage out? Hi there, how you doing? I'm really tired. I put the garbage out. Because I go, I mean, now that maybe that's for whining. But again, you can say something in a way that makes it sound like you're not nagging or giving direction. It's not always what's meant, but I alluded to this earlier, it's how it's interpreted, okay? But the reality about this is perception is reality, right? You've heard this, perception is reality. It's not, you see, even if it's not what you meant to say, the minute that the person interprets it that way, that's what you have to deal with. And if you become defensive about it, then you're going to probably be on your way to an argument. So even if you didn't mean to be insult or offend, it's okay, no big deal. Just apologize. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I apologize. I didn't mean. I guess I wasn't clear. I got a boss who does that at the university all the time. I kind of like it. You know, he didn't. I really didn't make a mistake, but you know, his professors think they're so smart all the time. I know you can work with them. Some professors, they think they're so smart, right? And the reality is that, you know, and the reality, as receivers, they're sitting there interpreting things the way they want to interpret them. And they've got poor D, right? And you know, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear." I said, he was totally clear. It's just that, you know, that one professor maybe is being obstinate or something, right? So, but again, he takes ownership. Okay, maybe let me say it another way, just because I want to make sure I'm clear, right? No big deal, but some people don't want to admit that, right? But it's easier to say you did something wrong, even though you know you get it. But you do it. Why do you do it? Well, you're doing it because, you know, it helps the other person. Okay. So the reality is that the best we're working towards understanding and health on both sides. Okay. The ultimate goal, what you want to do for your clients, ultimately, if you're working with relationships, you want them to learn to love each other. Isn't that what it's about? What do we mean by a healthy relationship? When there's trust, respect, love, right? I always say that when I do therapy, I say the foundations of a relationship are what? Communication, trust, and respect. Not love. Not love. Like, we get to love. Love is like down the stream. There has to be good communication, trust, and respect. Have any of you heard the expression that people like love each other but don't like each other? That happens in relationships all the time. I have like husbands and wives in therapy, and the wife will say, you know, I love him, but I don't like him. Or vice versa. You know, behavior, because they get so focused on the behaviors. There's a lack of respect for each other. Why are people together? They still love each other. What does that mean? All you sit there is badmouth each other, nag each other, fight with each other. You still love each other, but you don't even like each other. See? But that's because people have lost what? Trust and respect in the relationship. Yet they still stay in it, and they're miserable. But they love each other. Do you get it? Complete contradiction. It's one of the toughest things I deal with in relationships. I do this series on love languages, where I try to get back to love and respect. Whenever people come to me for marriage therapy, it's about love and respect, right? And communication. So, successful relationships are really about cutting through the stress, because that's the threat to communication. You see, to get to respect and trust, you have to be able to, it's done through communication. And we try to get to what we call equality and equity. I didn't put the equality wheel up here. Has anybody heard of the equality wheel? Anybody heard of it? I should probably put it up there. The equality wheel is all the things that we look at what makes an equal relationship. I do it in marriage counseling. But if we can get to this, and that's between our parents and kids. If we can get this between parents and kids, where we're dealing with equality, you know, how can I be equal with? How can I be equal with my kid? Well, last time I checked, children and youth and parents are all human beings. We're all human beings. What do we mean equitable with my kids? The word equity means fair. We want our kids to be fair with us, but we have to be fair with the kids. The parents need to be fair with the kids. That's what equity is. Right? So, human beings being fair with other human beings. That's what we're trying to facilitate as practitioners. We're trying to how do we facilitate fairness between human beings? Because all children and youth are what? Little human beings. Right? Adults are big human beings. Unless people are vertically challenged, then you can be a little human being. I have one of my students, she's vertically challenged, and she lets me know all the time. That's right. And then we'll look at overall health of parents and teachers. So we're going to look at some strategies to mitigate stress, or and look at what that looks like, just so we understand the enemy. And then we're going to look at some strategies to foster that you can use to support your client populations, right? First, this is kind of what stress looks like. Stress kind of leads to tension, can lead to family challenges, right, between parents and their children, and then it feeds itself. Okay, everybody understand a little more? I like pictures. Go to the next one. Okay. Based on the research, some things that stress out adults. Okay. I just put this up because you're practitioners, right? And you know, we can make the slides available. I gave a copy to Melissa, so you know she could probably send you the PowerPoint. Role conflict model. That's where parents, their role changes. Their husband and wife down to become parents. One of them worked, now they're a full-time parent at home. It's like at home. Their role changes. That can be very stressful. Okay. Restriction of freedom. That's, well, now I'm a parent, now I can't go and do whatever I want. Meanwhile, the husband, in many cases, the husband still goes fishing with his buddies, and the wife can't go out and hang out anymore. She's got stuck at home, right? She goes to work and gets stuck at home, right? But he still gets to go out. Yeah, that's the restriction of freedom model. If any of you want me to clarify these beyond what I'm doing, I'm trying to do it quickly, let me know. The sexual dissatisfaction model. Well, we know this generally, I don't want to overgeneralize, but normally in 9 out of 10 times, that's where the husband comes home, doesn't say hello to the wife, doesn't thank the wife maybe for cooking dinner, rolls over, wants sex at the end of the night, right? And of course the wife's like, hello, I have a name, that kind of thing, right? And then eventually the wife gets put off, and then the husband gets frustrated, and then this becomes a cycle, right? That's the sexual dissatisfaction model. The financial cost, again, this whole stress of not ever having enough money. What causes that? Oftentimes people living beyond their means, right? And then the more people get into debt, then they have less money for other things, so they're trying to pay off their debt. And some people get the expression, I guess, is they get house rich but cash poor. Some of you, especially in Toronto, where the cost of a house is like $600,000 now, right? We have a lot of house rich, cash poor people. Okay, and you know, it costs the average. Some people say the direct cost of raising a child in society is $150,000 a year. Now I want you to think about that. If you think about family poverty, which is $40,000 a year, right? A single mother would classify as family poverty, right? A single person is $20,000.